This is House Planning Help episode 296. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and try to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is John Hernon, Strategic Development Manager at Thames Water. We're continuing our mini-series looking at services, and today it'll be all about water, what a water company does and how we connect a new supply. This is also our final episode for 2020. What a year. I don't think we'll be forgetting this one in a hurry. But also thank you to you. I know perhaps the schedule has not been as consistent as we have been in previous years, but we've kept the podcast going. And thank you for continuing to check it out and to support it. We love doing this and we'll keep on doing this. We do miss visiting the buildings. We haven't done quite so much of that as we have in recent times, but we'll get back to it sooner, hopefully, rather than later. So let's get to our featured interview with John Hernon, Strategic Development Manager at Thames Water. And he's worked in various parts of the business over the last 20 years, but a lot of that time he's been dealing directly with developers. And so we're going to ask him a few questions about connecting up a water supply and also find out some background information. That's where we get going as well. Just wanted to know, what does a water services company like Thames Water do?
Well, Thames Water is the biggest water company in the UK. So we've got 9 million clean water customers and around 15 million wastewater customers. So effectively, our job is to provide clean water to households and to take their waste away as well. So yeah, we are the biggest in the UK, and we also cover London, which is probably one of the most challenging areas that you can work in.
And what do you use to do that? You know, water obviously comes from the sky and all the rest of it. You just collect it and ship it to the house. I imagine there's a bit more to it than that.
Oh, yeah. So we've got a vast amount of water treatment work. So we obviously abstract water from the ground. We've got reservoirs for collection of water. We've got a whole massive network of water. I think there's over 30,000 kilometres of water mains and network that we need to service and maintain. We've got a huge number of sewage treatment work. So obviously once we've collected that sewage through our network, we've then got to treat that sewage and then treat it to a stage where we can actually put the final effluent back into the water course. So there's a huge amount of work that we need to do. We're also generating a lot of our own power now. So, it's a humongous business.
Now, let's just talk about cleaning up that water to begin with. Is it always the same process?
It's generally the same process in our treatment works. So different treatment works, and when they were built, have different technologies, but generally the process is still the same in terms of getting us through the initial process to getting to the stage where we need to release the final effluent.
And what does that entail?
That involves there's about 3 or 4 different processes through that. I'm not an expert on the waste side of our business, to be quite honest with you, but we want to try and separate out the solids to the liquids, try to put it as politely as possible.
Yeah.
And then obviously a lot of the heavy solids, will dry those. I think even some of the byproducts we'll be selling to farmers and so on and so forth. And the liquors almost, we then actually go through that treatment process, screen that, clear out everything we possibly can, goes through the final sort of treatment process. And at that stage, we've got that final effluent, which we can then sort of get back out into the environment.
And is this done quite locally to where we live? In other words, you've got lots of these plants, or is there one big one, or how does it work?
We've got 350 sewage treatment works, but say in London, we've got 5 or 6 main treatment works. If you ever go and visit Twickenham, there's Mogden sewage treatment works next door to Twickenham. So there's 5 or 6 main ones, but yeah, across our entire region, we've got 350 sewage treatment works.
And when the water is leaving from that point and coming to the home, what is the infrastructure looking like then? Does it vary because of history, really?
Yeah, so if you're talking about the water network, so we've got there's almost 2 types of our water mains network. We've got the strategic network, which is effectively massive pipes that just transport water across our region. And then you've got the local distribution network. So the strategic network, we're talking, you can have sort of up to 60-inch water mains down to a small sort of 4-inch or below pipe, which we class as a distribution main. So yeah, the size and scale of that is huge. and the age of that network is also very varied. The new stuff that we're adding nowadays from new developments versus what was installed. So some of our water network, or quite a large proportion of our water network, is well over 100 years old.
So maybe you can describe the difference then between something that's old and what would go in on a new site or a new part of the network.
Yeah, so very basically, all the old pipes that we used to have are cast iron pipes. So cast iron pipes like to sit there, don't like to be disturbed. They like it nice and settled. Whereas nowadays, the new equipment being used, the new technologies, the pipes that are normally installed now by new developers are plastic pipes.
And is there any information on how those are going to age over time? I mean, the metal pipes, did they not rust, or how was that seen at the time?
I think metal pipes, were the preferred option, 100 years ago and so on. The plastic pipes give you that greater flexibility. Now, a lot of our network across London, especially, we do need to upgrade and change that network. The challenge we face is it's the disruption that will cause, because obviously the nature of our asset, we can't just pull these through a duct and so on. So we have to effectively dig up a road to actually replace. So we've got a massive program to replace our aging network, but it's going to take a long time because obviously we need to balance out between causing chaos effectively.
Is it just the chaos, or I imagine the cost must be huge of upgrading a network like that?
Yes, it's a massive cost for us to replace those assets due to the nature of our works. We, as I say, we have to go and dig these holes. We have to go and replace these assets. If possible, we'll try and line the asset. So where we've got an old asset in place, there is technologies nowadays where we can actually replace or line the asset itself rather than doing a full replacement. But it's a very timely and costly exercise that we need to do.
So how can you afford to do that? Is that part of the phasing as well, that you just need to play it bit by bit, gradually upgrade it, maybe have a better monitor of which bits have been upgraded?
Yes, we're introducing more technologies now to get a better understanding of where we have weak points in our network. So obviously what we tend to do is prioritize where we've had asset failures. So we'll be prioritizing those areas to replace the assets. So we have almost like a risk register to understand where we think we need to replace assets first. Because ideally we replace them all straight away, but that just isn't practical.
I imagine you're talking about leaks here.
Yeah.
What does that mean? If you get a leak, is it immediately obvious to you sitting in the office?
No. So unfortunately, a lot of our assets that will fail, they'll be leaking into the ground. So we don't get those, the big American style, where a fire hydrant gets hit and water sprays 20 meters in the air. So it's a lot of detection work that we need to do to find and fix those leaks. Now,
when we're talking about the water flowing, how do you make sure that the water is moving where you want it to move to?
We do have booster stations, so we do have to boost that water. So if people are living sort of on top of a hill, we often have booster stations where we'll need to boost the water up. It's not all gravity, it's effectively the whole network that we work with in terms of the water side is a pressurized system, because we need to guarantee a certain amount of pressure for every customer that we have. So we need to work out where we need to sort of boost our supply.
And when you're bringing it to the edge of a boundary, how do you know what that pressure is there? Is that a part of the technology that's starting to go in?
So we need to provide 1 bar pressure. So if you were to put a nail through that water main, water would spray 10 meters in the air. So that is our guaranteed minimum at the boundary of a property. A lot of our network operates at a higher pressure than that, but that's our kind of absolute minimum.
Okay, let's talk about new properties then. So this is what we're dealing with. We're building a house and we want to get a supply. So where does this journey begin for us as a customer?
So the journey from our perspective needs to begin almost before the planning stage. So we want developers, even small developers, to contact us as early as possible in the process so we can support them on that journey through.
And can you get water to anywhere?
We have to assess that. So again, by getting early visibility and someone saying we want to build a new house, and it's somewhere where we haven't got a water network, might have to do significant reinforcement to our mains network to supply that. So we would want to speak to that person as soon as possible to understand the sort of constraints that we'll need to face and whether we need to cross, third parties' land and so on and so forth.
And how much of this is new connections versus other business? Is it just all increasing, or are there terminations as well?
So in terms of new connections, we do a huge amount of work in that space. So I think, in the last few years, we've added 16,000 new water connections across our geographical area, which is actually equated to 40,000 new properties being installed. Because as you can imagine, in London, there's a lot of high-rise buildings that get one bulk supply, and that could feed 1,000 apartments. So we're adding a lot of new connections to our network on a yearly basis.
Then when we're looking at the cost of this, is there any rule of thumb of how it might work for a new connection?
No, that's what we do is we provide an individual quotation for all the new connections that come into us. So we've tried to get it streamlined and simplified as much as we possibly can. Someone who makes that application to us, we'll look to get the quotation out to them within 14 days. And then that quote, once it's been paid, will be valid for 180 days. So we'll be able to turn around and give that developer an idea fairly quickly about what that cost will be. There's things that we need to factor into that, which is we need to look at the distance away from our nearest assets, any traffic management that we might need to deal with, are there any lane rental charges and so on. So all these things impact the cost of the quotation.
And the time, I'm assuming, as well. So what will cause the most significant delays?
It's the most significant is the local authorities' requirements in regards to notification. So sometimes that can delay things up to around 12 weeks. If a local authority says, no, you cannot dig up on that road for that period, we'll then need to speak to that developer to make sure they're fully aware of that. So again, that's all ties back into the earlier you speak to us, the better, because you don't want to come to us, pay for your quotation, expecting it to be connected within a month. If that local authority then turn around to us as Thames Water and say, I'm sorry, you cannot dig up that road.
So presumably you have quite a good relationship with the local authorities, but that has no sway.
We work very closely with them, but obviously we need to balance that relationship up, because obviously they look at it from a disruption perspective. So us digging up on a road can cause traffic management issues for themselves. So we just need to balance up between what our customers require and also what that local authority requires.
So your responsibility, is it just to the boundary? I mean, what do we do once we've got our water supply?
So it is our responsibility to the boundary, but obviously once we've installed that supply, our responsibility is to that customer who we're now serving. So we need to ensure that we get that new account set up and the meter installed on and logged on our network to ensure that we can then fairly charge that customer for their services going forward. And obviously we also have a duty of care to ensure that what has been built there and what is connected to the water network is fully compliant. We will carry out those inspections to ensure that the fittings that have gone into that new building are actually compliant with the water regulations.
Maybe you can just explain a little bit about, I know this may not be your territory, but how from the boundary, how do we know about the pressure? How deep will the pipe go? What considerations do we need en route to the house?
So en route, so the key thing for that developer who is installing that new supply, so they'll generally lay out, say, a 25 mil or 32 mil new supply. They need to run that pipework out to the boundary, so effectively out to where the footpath is, and leave a little bit of extra pipe there. What we need them to do is to lay that pipework at a depth of around 1 meter, because most of our asset in the street is at around that 1 meter depth. So we'll need them to lay that pipework out to that point, because that will help in terms of frost protection and heat gain in the summer. So we will require them to do that. We'll come and inspect that. We'll make sure that they have laid that to the points of where they have to lay that out to, and they've used the right material. So in some occasions, we may have to say the area is deemed as contaminated, so they might have to put a protective pipe in there, a barrier pipe supply. So we all want to carry out those inspections to ensure that that pipework has been laid out to the boundary at the correct depth and is the right material.
Does anything go around the pipe, or is it just onto the soil?
Onto the soil. So we don't, wherever possible, we don't want them sleeved or anything, because if a pipe's sleeved, then you can't actually identify where there is. So if there was a leak on the customer side pipework and the pipe was through a sleeve, we wouldn't be able to clearly identify where that issue was.
Okay, as we get closer to the house then, is this where the meter's going to be on the house?
No, we generally install the meter on the boundary, so in the footpath. So that clearly demarks the point at which our responsibility ends and the customer's responsibility begins.
And this meter, what does it tell you? Is it all automatic back to base?
So our network at the moment generally isn't smart, but we're now looking to install a smart meter network across our region. So it gives us a better understanding of what the customers are using and where we are having issues with customer supply, i.e. if we can identify a supply that's running constantly sort of 24/7, we know there's an issue and there's probably a leak somewhere between the meter and the house itself.
So what are we, I know this might sound obvious, but what are we likely to be using this water for on a typical new house?
So a new house is generally for toilet flushing, washing through your dishwasher, and bathing, cleaning, sink use, outside taps. So they're the general standard uses that we have these new supplies connected for.
And is most of that water coming back to you?
Yes. So yeah, the vast majority, what we would love and what we're looking at, and like everyone in the UK is looking at, is all the water that we're providing is wholesome water, and you're using wholesome water to effectively flush a toilet. So we're now looking at all other options around where there's opportunities to introduce grey water systems. So we don't always need to provide potable waters to flush a toilet. So that's something that we are looking at actively at the moment.
Now, this may be a bit of a tangent, but, I have wondered, having built my own house, is a water supply connected to the toilet the best way? Are there technologies that advance this to make it a dry system?
There are systems, yeah. So it's a bit like these, when you go on an airplane, sort of that vacuum kind of toilet. So there are more and more of those now appearing on the market. But I think the general problem is they are very, very expensive. So, it's not, for someone building their new home, they would probably see that as quite a substantial cost.
Right. Now, when we've got all this sewage, I know that it's all being mixed up. So when it comes back the other way, can you deal with it all at all times? Or, you've got things like rainwater to consider, or is that separate?
No, so most of our network in London is combined. So we do have where the rainwater and the sewage is combined. So it's called a combined network that we generally have. What we're looking at now very, very actively is where we can separate this out, because when you have heavy rain, our sewers get inundated. So what we're looking at is all the opportunities we have to actually separate out surface and foul networks, to ensure that surface we can send to a water course and the foul we can take back to our treatment works and treat. And therefore that will then hopefully then start to create some capacity in our network, because again, in London, the network that was installed 150 years ago via Basel jets in a lot of areas is at its capacity.
And I guess that's another side of it. You're saying all these new connections. If you're not losing any connections as well, you're constantly having to grow.
Yeah, and that's the challenge now, especially where we're working very tight, constrained areas. That us introducing large new assets is a massive challenge.
Back to the house then for a moment. So who is doing this work? Is it our contractor who's going to take it from the boundary and deal with all the pipes and that side of things?
Yeah, so on the water side. So and we like developers to appoint an approved plumber, so someone who understands our business and understands what is required, so they'll know what depth they'll need to lay that pipework out. It'll be their responsibility to run that pipe from the inside stop valve out to the property boundary, and generally at that point, that is where Thames Water and our contractors would take over and liaise with the highway authority and do that final connection, which is to connect that new bit of pipe onto the main that exists in the street.
And what other things do we need to think about? Is there anything that you'd love to tell someone who wants a new connection?
I think the key thing for us and what we really want to do is make sure that people are fully aware. So don't always buy the cheap products. So obviously cheap products, yes, they are cheap, so it saves a bit of money up front. But we want people to use as much of the most water efficient products as possible. So there's a lot of thing in the press recently around leaky loos where you've got these sort of dual flush toilets, and a lot of them, the cheaper ones, fail. So you'll then constantly be wasting lots and lots of water because that system is constantly being filled up. So, and it's things like that. We really want to encourage people to look at, the best products and make sure they choose the most efficient products to help sort of drive down and save water.
And that's at the level of the house or the infrastructure as well, of putting all the pipes in?
It's generally at the house, but again, that's why we want an approved plumber, because we know that plumber will lay the right material at the right depth, and therefore there's less chance of that failing.
And are these quite simple plans when we're getting it all drawn out? I mean, it's not rocket science too much, or what things do we need to bear in mind?
No, it is. It's pretty simple, to be fair. We are, simply it's one pipe generally from that property out to the boundary in a trench, generally at the right depth. So that's generally all we're asking for, and then we'll come and inspect that. So once you've paid your quotation, we can say, right, I'm now ready. We will actually send one of our own inspectors out to make sure it's all been done correctly. Therefore, you don't have that risk of, our contractors turning up and say, well, I'm not going to connect that onto the network because it's not the right material or right depth, or it's been put in the wrong place. So we do that check to make sure that, things are all covered.
Are there any other parts of your process, so if we're one of your clients, that we should know about, or, how it all works?
No, what we've done, so obviously we're fully aware that the network that we operate in, that we have some huge substantial customers. So we've got these massive, big, multi-million pound developers. But what we've now put a big focus on is, the smaller customer, the single build customers. And if you go onto our website, we've put a section in there that makes it really simple. So we put some really simple guidelines on there just to help those single developers, because we were getting a lot of feedback saying we are not these big companies that develop huge housing estates and know the ins and outs of everything. We find this quite confusing. So we've actually spent quite a lot of time and upgraded our website to make it as simple as possible for these people that are just looking to get their supplies connected to a single house.
And are there ever any cases where a water supply getting connected to the mains becomes too expensive? Do you have to turn some people away, or is there always a solution?
There's generally a solution, but sometimes it can get costly, because obviously if you're building a new home in a field, a barn conversion or something like that, and there is a long run to try and get to that nearest connection, there could be a lot of cost to get to that point. So, sometimes people will look at that, but as I say, speaking to us early as possible, we'll give you that indication as early as we can about those costs involved. So we also provide a pre-development service. So even before you've gone through that planning process, you can contact us and we can give you kind of an estimate about what we'll need to do to get our network ready to support that new home.
Perfect. What I feel like I've asked all the questions I want to ask. Is there anything else you think I've missed?
No, I think one of the other things that we always say to these smaller developers as well, especially on the waste side of things, is to make sure they avoid misconnections. Things happen where people accidentally connect to a drain, and therefore if we've got then sewage running through a drain, that could potentially get to a water course and cause pollution. So again, we just want to make sure the sort of smaller developers are aware of that and connect right to the system. So again, where you're connecting to or intending to connect to our waste system, you need to get consent from us. So with that consent, then we can then come and do those checks to make sure that there is no misconnections and people have actually connected onto our sewers and so on correctly.
So that is, again, I suppose something you need to be wary of as a company, something that should never happen, really.
Yeah, and that's it. Someone sees what they just assume is a sewer, not aware that that might just be purely for surface water. They then connect onto that. And if they haven't told Thames Water about this, we've not had a chance to look at that. Suddenly, all the sewage then from that home could be then going straight into a water course and polluting that water course. Then we'll then get contacted potentially by the Environment Agency, and then we have to start doing that investigation to try and find the source of that. So if we know as soon as possible up front that we've got the confidence that these things are connected properly, it can just help those sort of wider investigations.
Well, I guess finally, what's the next 5 or 10 years look like for Thames Water, and where would you like to get yourself if you're on this mission of constant improvement?
The big thing we need to do, and it's obviously very highlighted a lot in the press, is there is a huge work we need to do in terms of improving our leakage. So our leakage levels are high, like a lot of water companies. So we do have a massive target in the next 5 years to deliver that. We're also putting a real big focus in the next 5 years on improving our customer service. So again, we've done a lot of work for smaller developers, but we're also doing a lot of work in the background in terms of improving the customer experience. When the customer has to contact Thames, we make it as seamless and easy as possible. We're also upgrading our website, so customers, when they have issues around their bill, they can actually go online and get some information online rather than always having to wait in a call center. So lots and lots of work is happening in that place. So really, it's all about improving the customer experience and really trying to drive down our leakage.
Lovely. Well, John, thank you very much for all the information today.
Cool. No worries. Nice to speak to you.
Head online to take a look at the show notes that accompany this session today at houseplanninghelp.com/296, where you can review the key points once again. Also, check out a few photos of some of the things that we've been talking about. Perhaps you have a comment or you'd like to ask a question. Well, we always give you our links on social media, but also you can do it within the show notes. That's the other way. Just scroll down to the bottom. We'll, of course, link you to Thames Water so you can check out their websites. All of that within houseplanninghelp.com/296. And if you're thinking to yourself, I need more, I've enjoyed that, well, we've got a whole archive of podcasts that you can go deeper into, coming up to 300 episodes now. And we've also got our membership community, the Hub, that we're always adding to as well. So there's a new chapter on my own build. This is as part of our in-depth video case studies, and we're looking around and getting excited about what might be next as we start on a fourth one. But yeah, just going back to mine. So this is the final chapter, the moving in story, where you put the kettle on, put your feet up, and that's it. Not quite. It's not quite like that. There are a few things that will keep you busy for at least a couple of weeks, I reckon. But all of that within this latest video. And then probably after that, our first case study was Long Barrow, which had to stop due to financial reasons. So we're going to go back there, get a couple of updates before we move on to our new case study. So there's the case studies. We've also got our live training sessions where guest experts come on and fellow self-builders and share what they've learnt and provide a presentation for us. Our courses, our private members only forum. We've got office hour where you can come and have a chat with me about your project. So find out more about the Hub at houseplanninghelp.com/join. That's it for another session. Thank you so much for being there. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media. Content that matters.